spec is absolutely tied into the marketplace. So like everything I've done has been to design this system that is as insulated as possible from the marketplace. I have contracts, I have lending in place. We are building this house no matter what. And very few construction companies that do both can say that. And I love that.
Well, very excited for the podcast today. Welcome, Zane.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you on. So we have Zane Goodwin. He's CEO of Goodwin Luxury Homes. And maybe we start there. You've gone through a rebrand as of late. So walk us through that.
Yeah, so it depends on how deep we want to get into this. But I had my quote unquote midlife crisis where I didn't know what I wanted. I came and saw a project of yours a couple of years ago, and I was like, maybe I'll go work for Brad. I went through that. I went through where do we want to live? We had 5 acres of land under contract, and we were about to build our own home. I guess probably what every custom builder on earth wants to do eventually is build something cool that they do every day, right, for themselves. But so we had a heart-to-heart with my wife, and we were sitting on our deck boards, not even the furniture that we had on our back porch, and we were like, man, what if we moved somewhere? What if this is not our forever thing? And so that conversation happened September, October of 2022, and I had this wild idea of like, hey, let's move to the beach. Let's move to a place where I guess a lot of people ultimately run away from life, so to speak. When you have some vacation, you end up at the beach 90% of the time. So we were like, instead of being 65 and moving to the beach, let's do it now. So we were like, well, where? Does the U.S. check the box still? And we said yes. And then so we were like, Florida, kind of explored that a little bit and said no ultimately. And then said, what about Southern California? And I'd never been. So we, December of that same year, we said, let's hit LAX and just start hitting cities on the way down. And found Newport Beach and fell in love with it. So 6 months later, we moved to Newport Beach from Atlanta. And as you can imagine, going through that whole process, it's like, how do I have a business that's in one location and I'm not there? So that could be a fun one to even talk about. So within that move, getting back to the original question of, we went from home and made custom builders to Goodwin Luxury Homes. And that was mostly driven by the Newport market. And then I was originally going to have 2 separate brands, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. And we said, no, let's just do that, rebrand the whole thing. Because, I think at least I think this way is like, a potential client that's in Atlanta would look at you and be like, oh, you operate in Los Angeles Metro and Atlanta Metro. Like, that's pretty cool. You must be pretty good at what you do if you are in 2 different places like that are of that caliber. So that's kind of why we drove that way. And we rebranded kind of fully into a design build firm. We've been a design build firm for quite a while, and we work with other architects as well. It's maybe about a 50-50 split, depending on what the client's looking for, or if we're looking to do kind of a value add or a loss leader kind of for that client. But we've changed that now into, we're kind of a architecture leading firm that also builds. And we've done that for a number of reasons, but mostly to capture clients. We kind of noticed, hey, our coolest builds are coming from other architects. Well, why can't we capture that client before they get to the other architect? So we've kind of gone down that path. That was a long way of talking about rebranding, but that's how we got here.
No, there's a few things that I want to break apart here, because I always find it very challenging. I mean, it's very interesting how people are able to, move their company, especially in construction. It's very difficult to be in multi-cities, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially multi-states, Atlanta to LA, that's not an easy trek. And, it's although it's in the South, both of them. And so the weather is a little bit more moderate to some extent. I mean, you have a lot of humidity in Atlanta. I mean, you still have some in California. But it's not like you're dealing with snow in Minnesota out to LA, right?
Sure.
But regardless, the construction types are different. The suppliers are different. The vendors are different. The labor pool's different. All these different things and especially, I know the advantage, as you mentioned, being able to say, hey, we build in Atlanta and LA, right? There's some advantages for branding and the clientele. From you as an operation, having a base in both cities. How has that been to manage, from afar?
Sure. So Atlanta Metro is run by our number two guy. His name's Andrew Goings. He's our COO, and I still kind of lay in the place of marketing and the sales piece of it, and like they kind of do the close of that, or I guess I follow all the way through, but like they're the I pick up from the operational piece of whether that's a design or straight into pre-construction and then construction, and they run everything. So I'm only high level on like the sales and marketing piece, and then through controlling like the financing of draws and banks and making sure we just have enough cash flow to support everything, is kind of where I sit. So on that, it's very administrative, and I can easily do that from where I am. Um, and then on the LA side, it is me thus far. Kind of restarting just like I did in Atlanta, in a sense of it was me at first, doing everything. You asked me what's your title at this point, and I ultimately said broom pusher because in any business doesn't really matter what it is, and more specifically construction. Most people start out with like they may be a trade person, they may have gotten in on the investment side of what doing a spec house looks like, but ultimately like you literally do everything, right? You're the guy that's picking up the trash all the way through the project management, through the doing the draws, and then at some point you go, hey, if we're going to grow this, I need to fill in these positions that are going to allow us to grow.
Well, I mean, the reality is you're a small business entrepreneur. So like it's, you're not going to be able to delegate 5,000 things. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
those you're self-performing no matter what,
sure.
leg of the totem pole they are, if you will. From opening a new area, though, moving to LA, Newport Beach, very competitive area,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you've seen. A lot of talented builders out there and architects and design, which, is your forte. So how has that been breaking into a new market, making new connections and starting to build a brand there?
Yeah. So when I first moved, I didn't, I wasn't set. Part of that midlife crisis was like, is this what I want to do? We still had the construction company, and we still can plan to keep pushing that forward. But I didn't know if that's what I wanted to do here. I've over time, and how I've gotten into construction slash real estate is like I wanted rental properties from the very get go of this. So like I found myself in wholesale. I was wholesaling to other builders, and then just property, et cetera. So I understood the acquisition side of spec home building and then flips, and then I got into flipping houses because grass is always greener on the other side. I jokingly say, well, I stole this from somebody. I don't know whose quote it is, but like, grass is greener on the other side, but that just means there's more bullshit to step in. And I love that. It's like, it takes more fertilizer to make the grass green on the other side. So, there's always the unknown unknowns is the point of that statement. So I ultimately didn't know, do I want to do that? Because I built a rental portfolio of 53 rental properties back in Georgia. And I was like, do I want to go down that path? Do I want to raise money from this community that is largely huge and huge amounts of money? And I started to go down that path, and it was like I slowly figured out that I miss construction. I love the erecting and like all of the process of construction. I absolutely missed it. So I was like, hey, let's just do this, and let's rebrand and run through this whole thing. So fast forward, here we are, and we're getting rocking and rolling, and we have a small project here now, which is working with a design done by Foxterra. If you've seen them on social media, they do really, really cool they do design side only, but backyard, huge, crazy pools with trees in the middle and like crazy stuff like that. And we're doing a project with them where there's 2 ADUs on this guy's property. So small allows us to kind of, to your point, jump into understanding the labor side, materials, et cetera. And it's been a whirlwind. The numbers are massively different in understanding, mostly labor side. Obviously, from commodity side, wood, concrete, honestly, all of that is very, very similar. So from material side, it's not too different. Just understanding what everybody from the electrician to the guy digging a hole, what they charge has been a fun one and been kind of like mind boggling. Like, how do we go from, hey, a really, really high end house in Atlanta is, I don't know, let's say somewhere in the $550 a square foot range. And like, you can get more than that, obviously, but like, you have to go pretty extravagant to get outside of that range. And, in coastal Orange County, that's not even entry level. It's like, really,
Yeah.
it's probably more like 650 on the low side to as much as
Yeah.
1200 on the high side. Maybe not even high side, but that's like that probably normal range.
It's a big difference for sure. Cost of building California, especially Newport Beach, is going to be quite a bit more.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So what's interesting about this, I mean, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, opening a new area is pretty tough in itself, and you have a signature project already, the Fox Terra, which is good to kind of put you on the map. But you made a comment earlier. You said, look, we're trying to be, more of an architecture firm that at time builds. And so you've almost pivoted there too, where you're going to more the design route, it sounds like.
Yeah. So again, we've been doing design build, and for a few years now, and I did that out of necessity of like, most of the architects that, and maybe I guess most builders can probably have the same feeling, is like, a lot of times, even if you get brought on early enough, you feel like there's many times where architects, because of the archetype that they are, they have the, you hired me, like, this is my design. There's a bit of that kind of chip on the shoulder of like, you can't direct me, from a client perspective. And like, that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And not all are like this. There's many architects that are not like this, but there's many that are. And I was like, hey, there's always this value engineer piece. And like, a lot of times when you go through the value engineering, at least half of the architects are like, no, it has to have these main features or I'm not doing it, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't quite say that,
But they do.
there's a lot of that. And you're like, from the builder end, I'm like, I don't make money until I start building this house. So it's like,
Right.
I'm like, how do I fix that problem? I fix that problem by being an architect. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
like, we brought in interior. First, it was like interior design, because like a lot of times clients would get to that point, let's call it the 75-80% point with an architect. And the clients are kind of fed up and they have really cool design, may just need to be changed a little bit, or there's some interior things that the clients didn't like, but the architect was kind of unwilling. So we would kind of pick them up from there. And then I was like, well, why don't we just move this all the way to the front? So we've been successful doing that. And again, I don't want to say I don't want to work with architects. There's some great architects out there that we work with and absolutely love their process. But it was like, this is where it kind of got into the sales side of understanding, hey, our coolest projects to date are through other architects. Like, why aren't they fighting us first? Well, hey,
Mm-hmm.
it's because we're not presenting ourselves as an architect. We're just presenting ourselves as, hey, if you haven't found somebody, or we do it as a plus, and now we're presenting ourselves much more as a design firm that builds.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've known a few builders, a couple here in town that have gone that route, that have, built their business primarily as a contractor, GC, and then started design build, started focus on design to almost where they eliminate the building side. Do you see yourself becoming more design, entirely, and maybe stepping away a little bit from the build and the vertical construction?
I don't think so, just because I love that piece of it, especially when it comes to like, us being a certified passive house builder and going down that like green construction route. That leads us into being able to, understand the layers of a house and what it needs to look like and be like, from structure all the way through to insulation, air sealing, all of those pieces that go into, quote unquote green construction. So we've for a while have been drawing our, hey architect, that's not us, this is what we want these layers to look like, and here's how we're going to actually do it. So we were already like drawing half of the construction sets anyway, at least by hand and not necessarily by CAD at first. And then we're like, hey, we're already doing this, we already have the details of how things are done, and understand most of the time at this point, like, hey, we'll drive the, here's how we want to build this structurally. Hey, structural engineer, does this look good? And they're like, hey, all of this looks great, except I'm going to up this one thing. So it's like we've kind of gotten to the point where we're doing the whole process, and we still need a few of those outside people to give their stamp of approval.
It's interesting. I mean, the passive house I think is fascinating because very few builders are building passive house, net zero construction.
Yeah.
It's interesting how there's a few builders I know in Atlanta, a lot in Austin, how it's kind of a trend, even in Denver to some extent. Where does the passion come from to get into passive building?
Yeah, great question. Going back to how I started this, flipping houses. I flipped about 70 houses over 3 years.
What
And
years were this? What years?
oh gosh, so that would have been 2015 through 18 and a
Okay.
half, something like that.
Wow.
And so like the business to date has just been this constant iteration of like, okay, we're flipping houses, and then we're going to start going after homeowners doing what we're mostly doing in the flips, which is, second story additions and like the little bit more hardcore versions of a remodeler, if you will. And then I was like, well, how do I get into the new construction? And like, the first time somebody asked me, like, can you do new construction? I kind of laughed because I was like, I'm taking a 1940 house and putting a new house on top of it and supporting the old house at the same time. I was like, I promise you the new construction is going to be easier. And it has been substantially easier,
Right.
which is fun. But so to answer your other question of building science and how it came out of I saw 50 to 100 years of building science and real world what actually happened to these houses that were these old builds, because we're fully gutting them out and get to see all of the rot and nasty and where and how it happened. And I fell in love with like the idea of durability. To me, a home is inherently sustainable if it lasts a really long time. We all say forever, but like if we can have a house that is not designed to last 50 years, rather it's designed to last 200 or 500 or more, then that house, even if it has a high carbon cost, is inherently sustainable. So my goal was ultimately like the guy that came behind me, like I kind of made this like internal promise to myself, the guy that came behind me in 50 to 100 years, when they opened everything up and they were going after what is more or less that aesthetic piece of construction, they weren't going, oh crap, hey, I have to reframe, 45 feet of a whole wall because it's rotted to death because of this design or this failure of flashing or any number of things. So it came out of durability as the answer.
Yeah, but what's fascinating, again, this growth is unbelievable, Zane, because I look at you and I mean, so fairly young, at least in my opinion, just, I haven't known you for a while now, but to go from flips to passive houses, which is a huge change. I mean, that's like anyone that's in construction and we go through this a lot. I mean, Mark LaLiberte, who's a building science consultant that we use on
Yeah.
all of our projects. And again, anyone listening needs to hire him as a consultant. But the point being is that as a GC that maybe specializes in new construction, it is a lot of arm wrestling with architects, engineers, and the subcontractors, installers, trade partners to get to net zero, to get to a passive house, because it's outside of what their day-to-day normal design or practice is. And so there's a lot of work with them, with the manufacturers, with the install, making sure things are done properly. And so to go from flips, which is a totally different, I mean, think just someone that is doing flips and investment to building ground up. I mean, that's two different scopes. Passive's another level, and then you add in the design build. I mean, you've had some exceptional growth, Zane. That's why I was thinking. I'm like, maybe it's 15 years ago he's doing flips. I mean, this is just like 8-9 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. And it's been this like crazy, literally every iteration that I've done. And I think this is true with all businesses. Like sometimes you start out with the blue widget and you realize the marketplace needs this, or it's out of necessity for what you want out of life. So like, I'll give you the reason. Like I was flipping houses, and at one point of having a, a ton of interest payments going out per month that would scare your average person, and scared me. There was so much anxiety of like, I have all of this money going out, and we were making money, every so often, every month, every other month, we were having these closings, and then that grow faster and faster. And so we were bringing in big chunks of money. But when you have, $20,000+ a month of interest payments going out, you're like, your
Hmm.
heart hurts a bit, right? And you're like, and then it gets listed, and then you can hardly sleep because you're like, is it going to sell tomorrow? And that during that time, they were selling really, really fast. But it's still like tons of anxiety. And I was like, I don't want this at all. So I kind of swore off the whole spec flip part of the marketplace. And a lot of builders love that and don't understand how I deal with clients exclusively. But I love the idea of building homes because, like, I know you guys do commercial as well, and I thought about going into commercial space just because it doesn't take rocket surgery to figure out that the bigger the project, typically the more money you make, right? If you're dealing with
Hmm.
a $50 million project as opposed to a $200,000 project, well, you're just going to make more, or at least that's in theory. But my point is like the reason I didn't even go after commercial is because it is not personal at that point for most projects. It's very investment driven, and I wanted to be doing projects that are home, not a house, not a investment, not a so even now when somebody calls us and hey, we want to, even if it fits our price range that we want to operate within, if it's somebody building an investment spec house, we generally don't want to do it because it doesn't have the heart behind it that we're ultimately looking for. And I'm thankful to be in a position business wise that we can go after those types of projects.
So, I mean, you alluded to this a little bit just with interest payments. How, did you have partners, investors? How were you doing all those flips, managing that, those many projects at the same time?
Yeah. So initially, no. So it was a project where it was actually a wholesale. Is how I stumbled into this. Is it was a wholesale. I was looking at going into the flip side, but I was kind of like a lot of people. Hey, you get fired, and you're like, crap. What do I do? I guess I'll start the business that I wanted to start. And so like for me, that I'm fired was I had a large wholesale deal where the investor was backing out last second. They were losing their earnest money. They were just like, I'm done. And I'm like, but this is an awesome one. Like, I'm going to make $80,000 on this. Huge amount of money to me back then. It's still a good chunk of money now, but I was like, yes, I'm just going to do this. So I went in, and since I had kind of facilitated all of the pieces for other investors before, hey, let's connect them with this hard money lender. I did everything I could to make sure that the investors were buying from me were going to be successful. So, I got really good at understanding the construction, at least as a wholesaler, because I didn't want one sale. I didn't want them to do a flip and then fail and then not come back to me. I wanted to make sure that they were successful. So I tried to facilitate all pieces of those transactions. So I jumped into that flip, and it was my college, so to speak, for construction. My brothers were they had a construction company together, mostly doing like heavy handyman type stuff, but they also
Hmm.
did decks and other things like that. They were never on like heavy construction side. And I kind of swore off construction because they had a contract where they went down to Florida and in Destin and built a huge deck and ramp where Florida had been rolling out their handicap accessibility, and like almost no hotel had these long wheelchair ramps. Despite what you're going to do in a wheelchair when you hit the sand,
Hmm.
they forced everybody. There was no there was no grandfathering in. Like you had to within a certain time frame have wheelchair ramps, and that's when Trex was getting big. So I did a huge project with my brothers down there doing these huge long ramps, and I swore off construction. I was like, that's hard, that sucks.
Hmm.
um, and then I went to college, did that whole thing, went in the army. I've lived a bunch of lives before now, and so I circled back into the construction side, but I don't even know where I was ultimately going with that. But what your question was?
No, but I just meant from the investor side, having
Oh
specs
yes,
and yeah, and you mentioned now you still have 53 rental properties. So I'd imagine some of those you didn't. I mean, you still kept some of those as like call it mailbox money, just recurrent investments. A diversification.
yep. So like I had always worked for somebody that was a small business. So I've never worked corporate job whatsoever where I had any version of a retirement or anything like that. So I knew that I needed to create that for myself. Um, And so, just over time have built this pretty cool portfolio that's, I think is pretty big in the scheme of things of other investors. I've met many people that have 600 houses and more. But I feel like it's a big thing, and then it produces a lot of cash flow already. And then, over time, 100% that'll be an easy thing for me to be able to hand through a trust and say, you can't sell this, but you can get the cash flow out. So I think it's pretty cool from that perspective.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, how do you feel? Because a lot of very successful business owners that I've met over the years, especially in construction, a lot of us are paper contractors. You're doing design build. Ideally, you're keeping all in house to where you have the fee from the architecture, fee from design, fee from the construction going vertical, and keeping that in house. To your point, if you're just a contractor, well, you don't get paid till it goes vertical. So, the architect and designer get paid on the front end. So if the project doesn't come to fruition, you're left waiting and waiting and waiting, and spending time on the pre-con side. So that's the advantage of the fee business. You having everything under one roof. Now, having brick and mortar behind you, whether you own your office, in a separate LLC and you pay yourself, or as you mentioned, rental properties. How do you feel that that's given that brick and mortar, having that additional revenue or investments, giving you more strength as a company, or comfort for your employees, whatever it is, maybe you and your livelihood, to not have to stress so much about how the economy is looking on a day-to-day basis in regard to fee?
That's great. I want to start with a piece of that. I kind of engineered this from the get go to be insulated somewhat from the economy, and that's why I've constantly gone up the stream of going after kind of the highest income earners that I can find, and then not being spec. So like spec is absolutely tied into the marketplace. What is the marketplace doing? Oh no, is it going to sell? Do I have to hold on to this house that I built and keep it as a rental that's negatively cash flowing, or et cetera? So like everything I've done has been to design this system that is as insulated as possible from the marketplace. If the market takes a crap outside of, banks failing again, I have contracts, I have lending in place. We are building this house no matter what. And very few, construction companies that do both can say that. And I love that. So to answer your other question is, yes, that is a 100% that next step of like, hey, if everything blew up tomorrow, I have enough cash flow and everything's fine where, everyone, all of my employees can be paid. We're in a much safer position because of that. And it's all just been by design of I wanted to try to be comfortable, and yet I constantly stress myself out by buying more and more stuff. I try to get all, if I have cash, it needs to go out. It needs to be making money for myself. Because I've just found that, if I am in a slightly more stressed position, not, heavy stress. If you have a bell curve, you want to be no more than that middle piece. Right. But, I find if I'm really comfortable, then I'm just like hanging out. I'm going to go put my feet up on the beach. But if I'm like, oh crap, I need to make some money, here we are and pushing to that next level. And that's just kind of how I operate.
Oh, it's so funny. And the reason why I was asking you earlier about, how a lot of builders that are focused on design, they kind of start working their way out of vertical, is because, the fact of the matter is, vertical construction, it's there's a lot of warranty,
Yeah.
right? In your neck of the woods, you have Andrew Patterson who's there, and he always makes a comment that your tail gets longer every time you build a house. And so that
Yeah.
liability and years of duration. So a lot of successful builders that have the building mindset and have done it vertically and have done passive homes like you, Zane, as you get into design and you have an eye for it, you're talented, they find themselves, not only because they're maybe creatives to some point, like you probably are, but they look at the risk and mitigating risk that, hey, if I design, again, I'm paid on the front end, whether the project happens or not. And then, I don't have the risk of building and warranty and callbacks and so forth. And, how does that balance look for you, just understanding the liability between the two?
I love this. So I heard the podcast with Patterson, and I I can't say his approach to that piece of it, but I think a major piece for him, at least in our area, is that kind of, I guess he or you used the example of like, we know we need to maintain our cars. We have oil changes, we have tires, we have all of these things that need to be maintained. And the same thing is generally true for the house of even if it's as simple as like maybe a once a year HVAC checkup, making sure the gutters are cleared out and they're going to do their job and just things like this that we could have as a maintenance schedule type thing. So I think it's more from a being a service to these types of clients as opposed to the risk piece. Like like again, all by design. Okay, so if I'm interested in durability, and durability is how I ultimately get into passive house, because like kind of like that main tenet of passive house is durability. And then everything else kind of follows behind that, with kind of like the carbon cost being the last piece of what it ultimately cares about. But my point here is like, if you build really, really well, if 90% of lawsuits come from, water intrusion for builders, well, then let's just build better houses that we don't get sued on and that we don't have to have callbacks. We have very little callbacks. Our warranty stuff is because we tell people, hey, at 1 year, we're, you know, we're going to come back through and we'll have a big list of, hey, these things need to be recaulked or just simple stuff like that. And our lists are very minimal, 10 or 15 line items that are just simple stuff that half of which are like the client beat up the wall when they moved in, and we'll take care of those things. So we just mitigate a lot of those more risk things by just simply building better, and like, let's mitigate the rest altogether.
So it's interesting because I mean, you mentioned just the level of detail and why you have less warranty. And there's an aspect to that, right? There's a lot of coordination, but one thing where a lot of people get pushback is, I'm sure it's no different for you. Even if you have a brand and reputation, years in business, you're still going to get, I don't want to say the tire kicker, because they could be serious, clients, but they're like, Zane, what's your price per square foot? Well, if you're at X, if you're telling me you're in Atlanta at 600 a foot and this guy's at 400, there's still that conversation about why they're paying for vapor barrier, why they're paying for WRB, why, these different upgrades. How do you work around just the pricing and cost and square foot and, the same questions many of us get, from all clients?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question that it comes up time and time again of like when it's wrapped around passive house, and I'll use Huber Zip System for example. I have builders that ask me like, well, how do you get clients to pay for Huber Zip System? They don't have an option.
Yeah.
It's not even a conversation. We should have standards. For a custom house to be built with commodity OSB at this point should be a crime in my book. I know it's not in everyone's, but in mine, it absolutely is. And so, I don't even have that question, I guess. Yeah. Is there a question? Hey, somebody wants to build something at $200 a square foot and we're at 500. Absolutely. That occurs. And where does that money come from? And, so yes, we have to have those conversations constantly of how we build better and the things that we do. But if you really break it down, this is a game of commodities, both labor and materials. Cause like in any given market, the let's say a framer that charges, just making a number, $10 a square foot, let's say, if they charge $10 a square foot, it doesn't really matter if they work for Zane or for Brad, they're going to charge $10 a square foot, give or take a little bit. Maybe they're going to be, hey, they do more with Brad, so they charge him $9 a square foot. But generally speaking, we should all roughly be hitting the same numbers. How you get these massive varying numbers is by somebody making assumptions that are not true. And this gets back into the planning side of, we're very similar to you guys. And I know you guys are very rare in this space that we fully design everything down to doorknobs and door stops before we're getting started. Mm-hmm. Why? Is because we come up with, we do fixed price. We don't do cost plus. We say for this exact set of plans and this exact set of specifications, it cost blank down to the pennies. And as long as that scope stays the same, that is exactly what you pay. So it gives somebody the warm fuzzy as to what it's actually going to be. And they'll never get the horror story of this is 20, 30, 40, 50% more than somebody said it was. So that's why I always find that argument. So if me and you are should theoretically be within five to, if we're good contractors, we're within 5 to 10% max of each other, a separation of what you would what you would budget versus what I do. And with that being said, the difference of traditional building versus, let's say, maybe not say all the way to true like certified passive house, but like let's say we capture 85% of that, it should only be like maybe 10% more than traditionally built. So it's not substantially more expensive. And that 10% probably maybe is more like 4% at a $5 million house. It's very nominal at this point because like most of the things are, things they're trading out. Hey, you have a $10 piece of OSB, you have a $30 piece of, Huber zip. There's only so many pieces of sheathing that you're going to have on a project. Mm-hmm. So, it's not substantially more.
Yeah, that's good perspective, a good breakdown there. And you mentioned that you do a lot of fixed price. Are you, whether it's California or Atlanta, do you find your clients owning the land, they come to you and then you're just giving them a fixed price for the full construction? Are you doing, spec homes ground up, that you're settling yourself? What does it look like from the, ground up new construction?
Yeah, so no spec. It's 100% build for contract, and two is, I would say 75% of the people already have land that are coming to us, and then we do. It's not on our new website as we've rebranded, but like because I came from the acquisition space for acquiring properties for other builders, I'm still very in tune with that wholesale market. So if somebody comes to us and they don't even have property, we absolutely have in the past helped find people property, and can do that pretty quickly because of just our access to the off market side of the world, especially in the Atlanta market.
Well, it's funny because the advantage of fixed price, to your point, is one, you're taking the risk. And so you can build in the margin that you want. At the same time, you have the exposure. The client's benefit is that they, again, they can't control your profit margin per se, but they can control what their total cost will be for the project. With that being said, to be successful, you definitely have to have specs ideally figured out, or else you do some hybrid like a lot of people do where you have some allowances in there. But let's say ideally everything's decided. Do you get pushback in pre-design? If someone were to come to you, if I were to come Zane and say, look, I want to build this house, fixed price, I got it. I want to start in 4 months. The reality is you're going to need adequate time to get through design, get through pricing and so forth. So what does that look like for you to set the expectation with the client? Because a lot of builders, the pushback I see most often is like, I don't believe it's realistic to get specs done before you break ground. Like, I don't think that's possible. And, we kind of allow the tail to wag the dog in the sense that, it's up to us. We're the guide, right? We set the terms, and if we're educated and we're communicative and we, explain that process, the clients will listen.
100%. I've kind of, so let's bottle that up. That the word for that is expectation, right? So it's like if we set the expectation, setting correct and clear expectation around communication, around how everything is going to work, that is the success or not of a project. It has very little to do with how good your miters are. Those matter, right? But the real piece and like the real success is people feeling as if they're in control of the process, right? They're paying very, very large amounts of money. And if you can set, here's how we're going to communicate and just dump information on them, so we use Buildertrend as well. And like, from a daily log perspective, we're putting anywhere from 5 to 15 pictures, videos, at least a few times a week. They get so much information that I don't hear from clients anymore. Rarely do they call me because something isn't right. So we've mitigated that piece, or maybe it's not mitigation, but let's go back to you talked about risk, that it seems more risky, or that the risk is falling on the builder. And while that is kind of true, I find it less risky in that it sets the expectation correctly. Now because like no matter how you split this, if I bring a set of plans, going back to a good contractor or two good contractors being within 5% of each other on a budget, is by expectation, right? And so it's like, I always find this interesting conversation around cost per square foot when somebody comes and they have a 8-page plan and they're like, well, how did you come up with this is going to be, this price range? Well, I'm going off of, what do you look like? Do you drive, a Corolla? Nothing wrong with that. Or do you drive a Ferrari? I'm going to start pulling from your life those expectations that I think you'll have. And that's where I'm basing my cost per square foot off of something that I have very little information off of. A lot of times I don't even have structurals at that point. And so, it goes back into that. How do you dictate or tell somebody that, hey, why we're at 400 versus 200 or whatever number spread there is. But what I'm saying is there's less risk around telling somebody, here's exactly what you're getting, in many cases with pictures and 3D drawings of exactly how we're doing some wood feature wall, and for this price. I find that less risky. Yes, that onus, if there's more framing or something like that, falls onto us, but it's less risk from uh, from a client perspective of, they're not going to have to call me and be like, hey, why is, you had $30,000 for this line item and it ended up being 75. If you have enough of those, there's clients that would be like, we just can't do it. And then what?
Yep.
That's far more risk than just being like, here's the price for, here's what you're getting. That's not risky to me.
Do you find business development arm? What does that look like? Now that you're trying to go full turnkey design build, and before you mentioned the referrals from architects and designers, now that you're kind of playing in that sandbox, what does that look like from BD?
Yeah, so that's the fun part, which is okay.
The fun
So
part,
as
huh?
as a builder, okay, like let's take you. Like okay, when you first started out, if I remember your story correctly, you just like hammered down on LinkedIn, tracking down all of these architects, right? You got to get in their face. Hey, here's what I can do. We should match up with you. And over time, they'll start saying, okay, hey, you're one of the three builders I'm missing these plans to. And then, if you do your thing right and the clients potentially like you, then you're going to get that job, right? So that's your average, like how most people do, business development as far as builders go. It's very old school. It's very, word of mouth, so to speak, where like, okay, now your other piece that you do obviously is this podcast, YouTube, social media, et cetera. So I'm sure you have people flowing in through those avenues as well. But we've always been the approach of, and again, this is another piece as to how and why we switched our branding. We said, let's be these things so we can capture these people. We started with what we want first, what level of client and what type of client we want. Let's go after them and let's brand correctly to capture them. So we literally have just started redoing marketing for both Meta, so Instagram, Facebook, and finding us on YouTube and my brain is not working, on Google AdWords, et cetera, of going after these clients that we're looking for. So that's been the side we lived in, and we changed that based on what type of client. And we've only recently started doing that. And thus far, it seems to be working pretty well.
What's your biggest pain point right now?
Oh, probably cash flow. I think that's probably every contractor's problem, right? And I have been slowly fixing that through working capital, both debt and just having internal money to be able to do this. You should honestly have Shane from Patriot Homes come in and talk to you about this. He's doing a company, I don't know the name of it, but basically that is all wrapped around fixing the money pass through most construction businesses, where how he operates is he only operates with the management dollars and profit dollars that come off are the only dollars that come into his business. Otherwise, it's a third party company where he submits the invoices directly to them. Clients approve, and then it gets fired out from there. That money never enters his business. And he's doing a whole business wrapped around that for the construction industry, which I think is going to be really, really cool. So,
real quick, so if I understand right, so he's working as a GC, but his fee overhead supervision is coming direct to him, and the clients are paying the trade partners direct.
Yeah. So what they're doing is they're setting basically up an escrow fund that They say, hey,
Hmm.
you have to have a certain amount of dollars in here at any given point, and the only money that's coming out of that escrow fund is their monthly management fees, and then their profit dollars that come out of
Or
that.
cost plus or whatever it is.
Yeah, so they're doing exclusively cost plus, and obviously this wouldn't work for, well, I guess it could work for a stipulated sum. You'd have to figure that out, but
Yeah, you would have to figure it out.
yeah, I guess the escrow company would be the only company privy to profit dollars, but
Hmm.
I guess it could be done nonetheless, as long as everybody agrees on here's this versus actual costs. But the point is that that's a pretty cool thing. But so to answer your question, like that's just the hardest part is banks give only so many dollars at any given point. Depending on the bank, they may or may not pre-fund doors or windows or cabinets, and so at any one given project, we could have out several $100,000 before we're ever getting them installed, and then finally once they're installed, then we can get that money back. So that's the hardest challenge for us.
So yeah, in other words, you know, you, we're trying to position ourselves so we're not the bank, right? Like we're,
Yeah.
you're the builder, not the bank. And so if we're the bank, then we have to change the terms about, how we finance this agreement. And so the point being, going back to that, so I understand the escrow account because yeah, it alleviates where when they have a traditional bank, to your point, if you say I need 50% deposit for cabinetry, they may be like pack sand. That's just a general term. Like I want to see an invoice, I want to inspect it. I'll give you 30%. And, the trade partner wants 50. And so, there's this battle back and forth. And so I get that aspect, from outside of maybe being the bank or taking the risk there. What does that look like? You mentioned Patriot Homes, why they push on having this escrow account. Are they worried that they may, again, not them, but like builders in general may rob Peter to pay Paul? What's the strategy outside of just maybe the risk of financing the job? Or is that it?
I think it has just to do with that. I think all businesses, no matter if we're all honest with ourselves, rob Peter to pay Paul to a certain extent. And to what extent is the amount of risk? I think in construction, the robbing Peter to pay Paul is probably more like robbing Peter, John, and Isaiah to pay Paul. And like that's where the problem usually occurs. Is there's just this big, because again, if you have these higher end projects, you could have a few $1,000,000 in cash flow out at any given time that you're kind of funding, even though there's a funding source in place. So I think it mitigates that, as well as you don't have to deal with that at all. You don't, in his scenario, as soon as that invoice comes in to pay the cabinets, whether it's
It's
50% or
done.
whatever, he sends it, it gets paid.
Yeah.
And like that way they know that it's not going to you and you're not, doing something else with it other than paying for their cabinet specifically.
I guess turnaround time is exceptional. I mean, does it sound like it may not be an invoice comes in on Tuesday, it's paid Wednesday, but is this like a weekly deal where they're able to withdraw from the escrow account weekly instead of maybe once a month?
Yeah, I think it's multiple times a week is the
Hmm.
ability there. I think it comes down to maybe there's administrative costs on the escrow side. So maybe
Hmm.
there's a certain amount of times you can do it. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they say only every 2 weeks or whatever. Who knows exactly. But that's the idea around that.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
It's really cool.
Um, yeah. So, how's the new life treating you in Newport Beach? I mean, it's not a tough place to live. So, it's one of my
Yeah,
favorite places.
it's amazing. I mean, it's like
It's not cheap either.
no, I mean, like that's honestly the only thing is like once you
Yeah.
get over the cost of housing, I mean, everything else is pretty similar, other than like you can generally say at a grocery store, the cost of groceries isn't any different than Atlanta. Now, the cost of food restaurants is just because it's just substantially higher. I mean, like the number of Michelin star rated restaurants around here is
Mhm.
insane. So, like, even if they're not a Michelin star rated, like they have to compete in this environment, they have to be this elevated thing anyway. But outside of housing, we found most costs is about the same. Yeah, gas is more expensive in California, obviously. But how many? I drive probably more than your average person out there because I love cars. And what do I spend extra in a year? $1,000 extra. I don't know. Yes, it's more expensive, but nominally.
Mhm. But it's
So,
hard to
but
beat that
amazing.
sunshine. I mean, Newport Beach is incredible. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I grew up in San Diego, and so of course, San Diego was home for most of my life. Living in Arizona for the last 20 years, we tend to go back. My parents relocated to Phoenix.
Yeah.
My dad passed away a couple years ago, and so my mom's here. But so it's like going to San Diego. We actually don't do that as much because family's not there. So we go to Orange County, Newport Beach, and
Yeah.
it's definitely one of my most favorite places for sure. Kids
Oh,
love it.
it's amazing. No, it's like it's little. It feels little, I should say. It's this
Hmm.
tiny little beach town. You would know that you're also surrounded by 3.5 million people in Orange County or whatever the
Right.
number is, right? It's like it's anything that you want from a food type of grocery store, anything that you would want is within a 10-minute drive. But also, you're in this little small, cute little town. It's like they found the spot, and it's been just building and building and building. And I don't know if I can say this statement for sure, but some of the highest, if not maybe the highest average, cost per square foot in the United States, I would bet is here.
For sure. I mean, you have CDM right there. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not cheap to live.
Yeah, that's
Like,
I actually live in CDM is where I am.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
amazing.
can I'm a 5-minute walk to the beach, so it's a
And for those listeners,
amazing.
Corona Del Mar, which is right there. And again, you mentioned there's a lot of shops and restaurants. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
It's great.
yeah, and I just got a new office. Office is on in CDM on PCH. You can see the
Wow.
water. You can see the water from the
It's a tough life.
yeah, it's amazing. So we're setting up there. I'm just now jumping into like I'm gonna be doing one long form YouTube video a week at least at first. So we're setting up a whole studio there, just to talk about this whole process.
Uh, so, what about for the family and stuff? I mean, how's the family enjoying the relocation?
It's been amazing. It's a we. My daughter, of course, cried at first. She was 9 at the time. She's 10 now,
Yeah, it's a
and
big
and she,
change.
it was one cry, and then it was like the realization, like, oh, we're moving from Georgia to California. There's not too much to cry about after that. After like, I miss my friends. Cool, we'll make new friends. And so I would say it's been a year and a half now since we've moved, and we're fully integrated. I'm Californian at this point.
Yeah, that's great. So, what are you doing for fun now?
Oh gosh, so it's not here right now because it's getting worked on, but I have a 2022 Porsche GT3, and
Mm,
the car culture in Southern California,
very different.
California as a whole is insane. So like in most places, I can speak of Atlanta. Atlanta has a cars and coffee type thing once per month. And then when it gets cold, they don't have it for 3 or 4 months, depending on how cold it is. And in Southern California, in any given weekend on a Saturday, there's 15 different cars and coffees. On Sunday, there's another 20. And just the amount of cars is insane. And when you drive a Porsche, a lot of these places that you go to, you feel like you're driving the entry level car, just by how expensive, $4 million Bugattis and just insane cars. So it's like not real life here, and I love it. It really pushes you to be like, oh, I need to push to that next level. My brain changed not too long after we moved here. You get the little real estate circulars in the mail, like some local agent or broker is like, hey, we sold these last month, and here's the ones that are currently for sale, and what's coming. And I went to my wife, and mind you, I moved out of a $600,000 house in Georgia, 3,000 ish square foot, built in '85, nice house, been renovated, whatever. And then we come to California, and I bring this circular to her because I'd seen enough, and oh, this is not that bad. And I laughed at myself before I said the price because it was only $8 million, and and it changes the way you think. It's like
Yeah,
it's funny to think about from like the outside, but now my brain is used to 10, 20, $30 million houses, and that changes the way you think because now it's like your brain is on this whole other level of like, how do you make $30 million to buy a house? And maybe
right.
you're not buying a house cash, but like it just changes your brain and how you operate, and I'm not upset about that.
It's all perspective, right? It's all perspective
100%.
relative to the market too and
Yeah.
area. Best advice you've been given?
Oh gosh, best advice I've been given. I think this goes back into the thing of
Besides the grass is greener and it has,
no,
you
no, no.
know,
No, the thing that has rung true for me is to stay poor. And not mentality, but just to constantly liquidate yourself, to force yourself into being like where's the next paycheck? How am I going to grow next? And that has absolutely worked for me. And maybe that wasn't advice from a specific person, mostly advice from Grant Cardone, but it's absolutely worked for me.
yeah, that's amazing. Well, Zane, you've been incredible, and can't thank you enough for the friendship, for making time today, and very excited. I mean, it's amazing to learn more about your story, the rebrand, and all that you're doing in two opposite ends of the country. It's very impressive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's, yeah, just little bites, little bites, little bites. And then all of a sudden you have an empire.
Yep, it's amazing.
Thank you so much.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.